Well, welcome everybody to our 8th Real Debate, and it's a real pleasure to have Nick Stevens, let's get this correct, the Executive Chairman of the RSA Group. Welcome.
Hi Ian, hi Dan, nice to meet you both.
Likewise.
Most of you know Dan Evans already, the Doctor of Packaging for Real Brands. So today we are going to be talking about the secret of human advancement. It's going to be a fascinating subject to talk about. And we'll be going into some really interesting areas and how to attract talent, how to create and build exceptional leadership teams. And we'll look at how technology is helping businesses recruit, retain, and optimize sustainable performance. Now, Nick, with your background in, I think it's headhunting is the correct term, isn't it?
Yeah, executive search. Yeah.
Executive search. Tell me, before we get into the nitty-gritty of our debate, I always start with this question. So what do you love doing when you're not working? I think I know what the answer is going to be.
Being with my beautiful wife and family. I love cooking, especially for friends. Anything to do with the water. I'm a huge scuba diver, but on or under the water is anything I can enjoy. I shoot clay pigeons. And well, yesterday's fun day was a track day down at Brands Hatch. So I enjoy driving quickly around motor circuits as well. Not as quickly as I should, but it feels
a bit of a speed fiend, aren't you?
Yeah.
So where have you been diving? Where's the most extraordinary place you've been underwater?
Oh, I think almost certainly the Banda Sea or Citadam, but both of those are in Asia. The Banda Sea it's an average of 4 kilometers deep, and it's punctuated every 40 or 50 miles by a volcano tip sticking out of the water, and you get schooling of hammerheads there, but it's the cleanest, most beautiful sea. It's just at the bottom end of the Mariana Trench, so it's an astonishing place. So far away you don't even get long wave radio.
What's the deepest you've been underwater?
56 meters, but 40 is the deepest you're supposed to go as a recreational diver, but wow. Yeah, without going into decompression. But
quite like
most of the life.
You done any diving?
I free dive, so I have the scuba off and hold my breath for a very long time. It's hugely freeing, just being able to potter around, in reefs and whatnot. The deepest I've gone is only about 30 meters. It's nothing mad, and not even then, not for a great length of time. But for, peace and serenity, I don't know if it's the hypoxia or what, but it just feels unbelievable. When you get deep down, you can swim better with schools of fish because you don't have these bubbles going everywhere. Oh, I just love it. It's just the best thing in life, to be honest, is free diving for me.
Keep meaning to learn.
Well, it's really easy. A damn side about the human body. Start holding your breath, and you'll start holding your breath for longer. I think I must have started when I was about 21, and I was preparing to go to Egypt, where there was some really nice reefs off Sham, which are probably destroyed now, sadly. And I just watched YouTube videos of like things under the sea and just hold my breath and then see how long it could go. Practice hyperventilating, which you definitely shouldn't do. Otherwise you black out in the middle of the Red Sea and nearly die like I did. Bad idea. But if you can measure your approach, you just do that. Have a timer, keep doing it. You get better, then you start moving around a bit more. And then eventually you've got 3 or 4 minutes under the water. Swimming, it's super easy. And I wasn't even very fit at the time. I could just hold my breath for a long time.
So let's crack into the secret of human advancement. Dan, I know you've got a question that you're keen to ask Nick.
Well, looking at your portfolio, it's a bit diverse, isn't it? You seem to have done absolutely everything. Which of these things really stands out for you? Which is the shining star, and why?
Oh, well, it's actually what many people might consider a small thing, which is through COVID, one of the things we realized is how tough it's been out there for people in that sort of 16 to 24 range. And I know Ian's been supporting at least one person in that range emotionally. But what we saw was a lot of really bright young people for whom the world had pretty much closed in. nothing to do, no real opportunity, enormous fear for the future. And we had the luxury of making a little bit of money through COVID, and we expanded our internship program to include a kind of a more diverse range of young people, and to give them the opportunity to come to work, to understand what the world of work looked like, to become familiar with our space, the life sciences, and with the explicit aim that they could, if they wanted to stay and add value, they could stay. If they wanted to grow with us, then we'd support them in that. But if by doing that they saw new opportunities in places they were not aware of before, or that were created because they were currently in work, as long as we talked about that on the way through, we would welcome them to leave as well as welcome them to stay. And Brilliant. It's just been fantastic to see how they respond. We haven't had a single bad experience.
Yeah, when I was younger, if someone had taken me to somewhere like that and opened my eyes to the worlds that are available, I probably would have been in neuro, I imagine. But at the time, when you're just in school, you're looking at books and, there's a diagram here, diagram there. It doesn't really, invoke much interest, I don't think. And until I got into my weightlifting and looked at biology, then became a medic, I realized that the world of medicine and biology is bonkers. And the deeper you look, the more expansive it gets, the more interesting it is. And it's just a whirlpool of cool stuff. So what I'm saying is it's absolutely needed. Yes, great, happy. Get young people interested in cool stuff.
Yeah, and biology is ultra cool.
So Nick, in the work that you do, how do you spot talent, exceptional talent, and how do you think this process is going to change over time with the advent of technology, artificial intelligence, robots, humanoids, and all these things that we are learning about? Some of them are quite frightening. How do you do it, and what's the current process?
Yeah, well, I think
a big question, that, isn't it?
It's yeah, how have we got? It starts for me with there's a fundamental belief that there is no such thing as somebody who's wrong for a job. It's the wrong job for someone. It's putting the whole thing backwards. So you start from trying to understand what the role really is. And as often as not, clients think they want more of the same. And so you have to advise and work hard to look at where that organization is going to be in 3, 4, 5 years' time, and to get a picture of how that person actually stretches the organization. Because if it's somebody who brings no change, then you shouldn't be bringing them into the organization. So first it's about definition. And then it's about understanding that it's horses for courses, not courses for horses. So we have to then understand really people's motivations. So that if you divide this up into technical ability, and what Dan just said, I think is absolutely pertinent to that, and fit for the role, those three things. So it's a marriage of performance, people, and environment. Yeah. And once you've got the role understood properly, you start to do what we call the perspiration phase. So this used to be about looking at lists, ringing people up, working your network, thinking of who you already knew. And the change that's happened, I suppose, since the mid-90s when the internet appeared, is those lists have become larger, longer, more textured, more detailed, and more interrogable. So it's just not good enough to work your network anymore to find talent. What you need to do is to map that market more thoroughly and to do more detail from a distance. Yeah. And that is changing very, very fast. So the access to tools and information means that there's a lot more work at the back end of that to identify and characterize people. Tools that are public source like LinkedIn or Facebook or regulatory authorities, the FDA, the stock exchanges, all of these things contain information that add texture to people's career and background. And then I think the big thing is to say, how do we then identify what really motivates you? And that's about an honesty that it doesn't come from selling you a job. And this is just spotting the talent, because everybody has the talent. You know, Dan has the talent to swim for 4 minutes underwater, and so do I. The difference is that he was motivated strongly enough to do it. You know, anybody watching this could do it if they chose to. So it's about, what do people want to do? So that's about a conversation with them about understanding what their ambitions are, where they want to go, whether or not they want to leap out of bed in the morning and pursue whatever that mission is for that role, or whether they're likely to roll their heads and get back under the duvet. And both are fine, but the talented person for that role is the one who's technically capable and who wants to leap out of bed every morning and go do it.
That really hits a chord with me with my weightlifting, because I've done quite well with it. I end up getting some new person under my wing, you know, and typically they're young and unsure and naive. I think, oh God, I wish I could like lift this or that in a competition, but I never will. And one of the most important things for me, and it's something that someone said to me, is tell me what you want to do and I will absolutely believe you. As long as you kick your ass in it, do your best, say what you want and I'll believe you, as long as you put the effort in. And anyone can do most things, you know. I think sometimes but some people say that certain people are stupid because they're not good at a particular subject, but they end up being excellent engineers, mechanics, craftsmen, all sorts of things. And you just need the person doing what they like, doing what they're motivated to do. No motivation equals failure.
It's a self-fulfilling piece, and I don't want to be a part of that. You know, in the interactions we have, the question is, you know, it's either a shorter or long-term investment. If we've done our perspiration phase properly, it's a shorter-term investment because I know, Dan, that you want to do X and that you're competent to do X. So now the question is just whether or not this is the right role for you. If it is, perfect. If not, now I know what you want to do. And when a client retains me to find someone who can do that, I know where you are and we have a relationship of trust and confidence. This is where my worry is with the tools and the AI and the big data that Ian was talking about, because those things are very much at the moment a crude instrument. They're and they're subject to being vaporware. You know, it's very easy on your link. Well, you know, on my LinkedIn program, it says I'm fantastic and my mum agrees. Yeah, you know, and we can all do that, but it's not good enough. The tools exist now to be able to test those things, you know, with psychometrics, with interview, with referencing, and with people's actual experience. The question is really about AI. I think when AI, and it will, when AI is good enough to do what we do, it's probably going to be good enough to do what everybody else does too.
But
And
but not necessarily with a creative flair that we expect from human beings.
Not necessarily, but possibly. And I mean, if you really believe in these, and if you believe in the potential for exponential growth, and I do, in the power and complexity of computing, that you'll be able to simulate anything. The question is, will there be any jobs? And if there are no jobs, then everything becomes recreation, as long as we're taxing the robots properly. And that's okay, but we've got to tax the robots, right?
Indeed.
So when you have this perfectly tailored group of fantastic people, how do you get the right leader?
Yeah.
And now
so leadership is as much about the people that you have wanting to follow you. Yeah, so it's really easy to be a leader if the people that you have around you want to follow you.
Be a good one. I mean, you could be as charming as ever and people will believe in you, but you could end up being a total sack.
I
So
think
what makes the good leader? What fits that leadership synapse?
I think that's number one. It's about a desire and having the toolkit to make the team around you succeed. If you want your team to be successful, and you share a common goal, North Star, if you share and you can articulate what that North Star is and your people buy into it, and then you become not a manager, but a problem solver. They do the work and you solve the problems they have in doing the work. And I think that's what makes the best kind of leaders. It's people who, the best leaders are trusted by their people. Their people know that they can make mistakes. They have permission to make mistakes. They have permission to make their own decisions. But they also know that that person is vulnerable enough that they will understand when you need help and to give time. So yes, articulating a mission, engendering trust, being human about this. You were in the military, I believe.
You know what? I immediately thought, I was about that in the military. And then he said military, yes, I was in the military.
Which branch? Because I always like these.
I was a medic in the Royal Navy.
Yeah, so brilliant. If you think about leadership in Navy and Army, there a general friend told me about this. Former head of the Armed Forces for Singapore, actually. He talks about it and he said, look, leadership in the army, you've got several fronts, you've got enormous complexity. What you need is people who are well trained and have enough independence of thought that you can give them an objective, send them away and not be able to communicate with them for hours, minutes, days, but still know that you can carry on going towards that objective with reasonable confidence that they'll get there too.
Yeah.
This leadership in the Navy is very different. He said it's much more about that you are literally all in the same boat. So what you have to be able to do is to trust the next person absolutely to do the job. So it's much more like being in an operating theatre. You put out your hand, you ask for a scalpel, you know it's the right scalpel. You don't need to check. If you need to check, things have gone wrong. So Navy is much more about precision, about breaking tasks down. And so leadership in the Navy is different to leadership in the land army. Does that make any sense?
If military people read this,
when we're talking about highly technical and very specific organizations, industries, etc., do you think a good leader must come from that industry and be an expert in that sector, or is it more important that they surround themselves by experts within that sector?
I think it helps as long as that expertise doesn't disempower their team or disable them, which I think is where you're driving at. And I think especially in the creative industry, it can be destructive. And by the way, I include biotechnology and science-based industries as creative. And I think that the question actually is about who's responsible for making that decision. And this is about risk and risk minimization. This is why we have boards made up of men like us, middle-aged white men, because when you have the choice between someone who hasn't done it before and someone who has done it before, all other things being equal, it looks like a lower risk decision to choose the person who has done it before. Yeah. But in creative industries, you can't risk minimize your way to success. If you take the easy path, you always go down. Yeah, and so that is the risk you run, especially in creative industries or industries that depend on people making conceptual leaps, is that you get groupthink and you get less and less difference and less progress for more and more input.
So it would be perfectly feasible to take the chief executive of a retail group and pop them into a large pharmaceutical organization and expect them to thrive.
Well, you could ask Emma at GSK that question, I suppose. It should be perfectly feasible, yes. And I don't see the board of a large pharma company making that decision and then justifying it to their shareholders when there was an alternative, somebody who had done it before. So it should be, and this is where the space comes, because you are seeing this now with you've got this intersection at the moment, this convergence of the power of computation, AI, big data, all of those things, that the understanding of biology, that fundamental understanding of the genome, the proteome, more recently, all of the structures produced by AlphaFold of 97 point something % of all of the possible human proteins. There's enough data, there's enough computing capacity to pull that together and to allow people to make insights that could only be reached after 20 or 30 years of serious scientific endeavor or serious work in the biotech industry. You're starting to see people look at new medicines as an engineering challenge rather than something greater than that, something that can be broken down into a series of steps and turned into a playbook. And you're really seeing this at the moment with cell and gene therapy. So some of the cell and gene therapies now, you're seeing companies that are just bang, 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 and new people can come into those without experience and make them work as long as they have people around them who have the technical skills. Absolutely. So that's where you're seeing it. Biotech, medtech, not big pharma.
Very interesting.
So on the topic of data driven due diligence, what the devil is that?
Yeah, okay. This came from two things we've talked about before. One, the fact that there is so much data available now on people, or that can be turned into actionable information, useful stuff. You need, and the realization there's three things you need to make any business in the space that we're in. The first thing is great technology, preferably intellectual property, although we'll probably get onto the fact that I don't like that as much. Access to enough capital to run the experiment and the right people to do it. And actually, the money and the science are worth nothing without the right people, because they can't do anything themselves. They're not actors in this. When you look at new technology, you do due diligence. You describe the thing that you want. You describe what it will achieve. You go and do some research. You research against a number of key criteria. You bring those through, you do more detailed research, you might run some experiments, and then you might end up with 4 or 5 possible options. And then and only then do you put in your personal experience, your expertise, your opinion. Yeah, it's all run by data. When your bank decides whether it's going to lend you money for a mortgage, or a venture capital firm decides whether it's going to fund a new venture, they do the same thing. They have an infinite number of possible ventures to invest in. So they decide to specialize, they do their research, they measure them in common ways against each other. They bring forward a smaller number, and then the investment committee sit down and say, you know what, in my experience, I've seen Ian and Dan as successful business people before. We'll put some money behind them rather than the others. Let's go. You add your expertise and your experience at the end. But then in executive search, historically, what people do was one, sell their network. So you recycled a number of people and their careers progressed because they did, and they had the opportunities others didn't. But that's not good enough now. We're in a global economy. We're in a business where if we do this right, more people, we save lives, right? My organization, if it does its work well, helps to save lives. Really simple. So it's not good enough just to flog people at people. So we said we'll apply those same techniques. So we have an analogous set of techniques, actually, to the way new drugs are developed, that we apply to analyzing and characterizing the people in the market that we operate. And then we use that to triage forward so that we can back end a lot of data down into a smaller number that's manageable and tractable by experienced people who then add their experience and their insight. So that's what data-driven due diligence is. It's an analogous process to drug development, but we do it with people and roles in that industry.
You touched on intellectual property. We hear about open sourcing and freely available intellectual property. Elon Musk being a good example of giving away his IP. What's your issue with IP generally, and why should companies not be holding on to their intellectual property?
I think it's actually about performance. I'm all for people being paid for the risks they take. I'm all for investors getting some upside on what they do. But when IP becomes basically an excuse for inefficiency and continued failure, what you're doing is you're building it's a competitive levee, right? It's holding back money and opportunity from other people, and that's absolutely reasonable if you put the work in to create something. But one, it's a much more multifactorial thing now. You know, you're using the information, biometric information from tens of thousands of individuals in a large clinical trial. They're bringing something to it that's unique too. And what it's done is it's caused this enormous cost for new pharmaceuticals that's unnecessary. If we were free to go about using that data without the defenses of regulation and intellectual property, the prices, people would be made to be more efficient, more drugs would be produced at lower cost that did better work, and humanity as a whole would do better. More lives would be saved and more money would be made. They really would. And this is where we're back to, you know, Demis and AlphaFold, that publication of that database free of charge to the world. You know, that's the continuation. We helped, excuse me, we helped build a thing called the Structural Genomics Consortium, who spent, I don't know, probably over 200 million now producing structures of proteins. And they've done that the old-fashioned way. You make the protein, you purify it, and you derive the structure from things like X-ray crystallography. You know, that was done for free. You know, the Wellcome Sanger Institute did the Human Genome Project for free. Why? Because they were desperate for Craig Venter not to own it. Yeah. And Demis has done the same thing by releasing all of these structures. It's going to be an enormous value to the world. Drug hunters anywhere now can look at a protein and understand in much more detail how it works, and maybe, you know, construct a solution to cure another disease.
So with you mentioned gene therapy earlier on, and IP. There's lots of gene therapy within particular individuals that have cancer. Would you be able to make that cheaper if people didn't have IP? Because I know chemotherapy and all sorts of cancer drugs are intensely, like beyond reason, reasonably expensive.
Could you, yes, you could. I think
basically, is intellectual property the reason why chemotherapy drugs are insanely expensive?
No. Yes and no. The reason drugs are insanely expensive is because it costs, you know, on average now $4 billion to get a new drug registered. Now,
what? How much?
$4 billion per newly drug.
Come on! With chemotherapy drugs changing all the time because they're getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
Just 4 billion. 4 billion. 4 billion.
4 billion each is the average. With what you don't see is the failures. So, but the reason that it costs 4 billion is because, because clinical trials, again, the regulators will always expand and make it. We need this bigger and more expensive.
Yeah.
It costs money to do clinical trials. The reason that it's expensive is because there's a huge attrition rate. Thousands of new drugs go into development that shouldn't. And if people had designed the drug trials properly, or weren't saying, well, this is our only asset, this is our IP, we've got to sweat it. Yeah, then, so if people were more rational, if they used their data better, if they were creative and safe about the way they ran development, if the regulators cooperated, and you see this, then the cost of drug development would be dramatically less. So you could very easily get it to, say, an average of 400 million. So take a zero off. Yep. And if you could speed up the time that it takes to develop a drug. So on average, it's 14 years from patent to registration. You've got 21 years on your patent life. So you spent 14 years and $4 billion. You've got 7 years left to get your 4 billion back before you make a profit. So if you could make that cost 400 million, you could immediately cut a zero off the price of the drug. And if you could shorten that time from 14 to 7 years, yeah, you could halve the price of the drug again, because you'd have twice as long to sell it. So the IP is part of a network of problems. If you look at what we did with COVID vaccines, when the regulator said, tear up the rule book, just make sure the safety is okay. When the industry said, we have to do this, which by the way, they always do, despite its really poor reputation, nearly everybody I know in this industry goes to work because they think they're going to help save some lives.
Yeah.
Despite that, and the other thing that happened was that the barriers between ivory towers, academicians, clinicians were knocked down by COVID. We were, on a war footing, to go back to the military thing. The barriers between the industry and the healthcare systems were knocked down because we all suddenly realized we needed each other. And look what happened. Look what happened. 14 months, not 14 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with that playbook, we were talking about cell and gene therapy, with manipulating people's immune systems, two things will happen. So one is that they will get cheaper because, well, at the end of the day, you can't support that price point for all of them. That will reduce the value of oncology companies. But the other thing is, what people will do is start to move those technologies out from very acutely life-threatening situations where there's a narrow band between this is going to kill you and this is going to cure you. If you've got diabetes or you're going to try to cure hypertension, that it has to be much safer. So you have to have a much wider band. So once these things go into mass market drugs, which they will do, the technologies are applicable in pretty much any disease state, then you'll get economies of scale. And it'll almost become like your generic antibiotic, threepence a bucket load.
Yeah.
So the signs are good, but yeah, IP and overcautious regulation and a lack of collaboration are the three things that make expensive drugs.
I mean, without side rolling this speech too much, this chat too much, why don't people work together then? If you can get amazing things done in an extremely small amount of time, relatively small amount of time, why doesn't it happen? What are the fears between individual companies from working together? Is it financial? This is my product. It's only mine. Only I'm going to take the money from it. Or
well, we're talking about people and leaders, and yeah. So go and look on any drug company's balance sheet, and its intellectual property will be there. And cost of goods. Once you've got your drug registered, your cost of goods is 1 or 2% of the sale price. So the gross margins are enormous once you've got your drug registered. So holding on to that IP looks like, and being incredibly zealous about guarding it, looks like the right thing to do. Right. Because that's on my balance sheet. Every CEO I've ever met, every annual report you will ever read will have somewhere in it a line that says something like, people are our biggest asset. And my response is always, well, why aren't they on the balance sheet then?
Fair. What's the usual response then? What's the response to that? Is it just a tumbleweed?
Yeah, it's silence. but it's a fact, isn't it? It's the people who do the work.
Yes, unequivocally, unequivocally.
Coming back to one of my favorite subjects, robots. As you know, I love robots and humanoids. And
As long as Apple, Ian, as long as it's
yeah, I know. It drives my wife crazy. What sort of roles over the next 5-10 years do you think will be taken over by robots and humanoids in the workplace? And I'm talking about sort of practical jobs like, I don't know, processing documents and filing and all that.
Yeah, most of them. I mean, the sort of Elon Musk sci-fi humanoid robot, I think it's probably going to be in people interactions. I was one of the books that I was going to Kara and the Sun. If you haven't read it, it's great. Ishiguro, great book. But I think robots won't look like people because that won't be the most practical thing for them to do. In fact, most of them will be software. And yeah, we're back to that. They will disintermediate most of the jobs that exist today. And the few that will be left will be I don't know, carpentry. That you will be able to build robots that do anything that's a replicable task better than humans can. That's going to happen. So the question is about back to creativity and about what you value, because the great thing about money is it's only worth what people will pay for it. And so now we value brand, we have intangible value. And so I think the change in the workplace is going to be creating intangible value, which is no less real. And it's also the only way for the planet. And I know this is dear to your heart. The only way for the planet is to make a circular economy where we recycle 100% of what we do. We don't use things anymore. But you can't destroy an idea. You can't there is no energy cost to maintaining a memory or
that could be argued.
small, comparatively small.
There's an emotional cost to it, I think.
Yeah. but my point being value we have to change, because anything that can be done by a machine probably will be done by a machine in what will become a circular economy. So therefore, the way that you grow economies and make value and have real jobs, those real will be those things that people perceive to have value, and by perceiving they create value. So whether that's I've got my Nike badge on, or I've watched the sunrise over Machu Picchu.
That's the one. Honestly, again, off subject, as I always do.
Well, you usually go off piste,
I mean, it's kind of what I do. You've not stopped me talking yet, Ian, so I blame you.
Never have.
My missus and I, one of our first proper dates was camping at the bottom of Snowdon, waking up at 3 a.m. This is full winter conditions, so we've got our ice axes, our harnesses and crampons on. Went up to the top. I think we're at the top at about 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Watched the sunrise on a fairly misty day. It's winter in Snowdon. Started the day with some Haribo and tequila, and watched the sunrise over the greatest country on earth, Wales. And
breakfast of champions.
Yes, tequila and Haribo. And it's like nothing beats that. For me anyway. Well, diving in the sea and being one with the marine life and all that, you can't put a price on it. Absolutely not.
We're back to, if we really believe that we can get to a post-scarcity world, and that's absolutely within our technological ability. If we really believe we can get to a world where work is something you choose to do rather than something you need to do, which again is a kind of logical certainty, it will only be stopped by things like intellectual property and the 0.5% or whatever it is now. But if I'm not being idealistic, these are just logical consequences of the ability to build software and hardware robots that that take away our work is that there'll be new kinds of work, and they'll probably be voluntary.
Well, what will we do then? Are we as a humanity ready to have our jobs taken by silicon?
Are we ready to, well, we find other ways to feel valuable. So, you know, it'll be the poets and the, you know, maybe this is what TikTok is.
Yeah.
You know?
Preparation.
I wondered what TikTok was.
That's
now it's
how I
explained.
feel. Yeah. Well, I'm fed, I'm warm, you know, I have access to all of the things I need, and I get to dance as a polar bear in front of 30 million people who clap. You know, that maybe that replaces it. I don't know.
Talking to senior executives at pharmaceutical companies, etc., do you think they're ready, equipped for the massive change that's going to take place in the next 5 to 10 years with the advent of new tech?
Not a bit of it.
Do you think they understand it?
Spot on, exactly where I was going to go. What we have is, did you watch Chernobyl?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, or any disaster movie you like. Human beings see things in a linear way. Yeah, and so we think that we can keep up with the rate of change of these kinds of things. And this is probably the perfect example of exponential change. What is happening here with data, with AI in the workplace? This is the wave of disintermediation that's already happened. You know, Uber, Amazon, you know, it's getting rid of taxi drivers, shopkeepers, things that require very little in the way of intellectual property, that treats people like a work unit. You know, it's almost like being back in the Victorian times. That AI executives, being human, see that change as being something manageable. It's not. And so we're back to that question: who owns the output of the robots? They will. This will be an exponential change. We will not be able to keep up. Some people will be able to leap ahead. Some people will be able to eat the pharmaceutical industry's lunch and make themselves very wealthy on the way. But no, the industry is not ready for this. What will happen is the dinosaurs will die. A few of them will evolve and become birds and survive. You know.
Interesting. How's progression like? What's progression like in the medicines world then? What sort of things are stopping you? Obviously, it sounds like intellectual property is a good doorstop to progression. What other things are hindering us the most in really making huge advancements? I recall, this is before I was as focused on accuracy as I am now, but I watched a documentary on editing the genes of a baby to make sure that it didn't have this allergy or this deformity, that deformity, but they weren't allowed to do it because of religious beliefs and how you shouldn't. Morals, I suppose, would be that morals seem to get in the way of editing babies' genes to reduce diseases. And those sort of things. Went on a bit of a tangent there, kind of lost my way, but you get the gist, I'm sure.
And I've forgotten what the question was.
Oh, damn, I went on too long. I lost my way too long. What gets in the way of medical advancements?
Oh, misunderstanding of ethics. You've mentioned intellectual property again. The fact that I can't operate in this domain, and I think a real misplaced understanding of information and information risk. So
information risk.
Yeah. So we are. Imagine a world where your genome was freely available to the world, where
personal genome.
I don't want you to have my medical records. It's something you hear all the time. Why should I give this company this stuff? Well, you know, Amazon knows everything about me. Google knows everything about me. I'll happily give away all of my information to play Candy Crush. And that's down to what my heart rate is, where I am, how much is in my bank balance, blah, blah, blah. I'm happy to give all of that away. but I'm not happy to give that away or use it to enable new treatments. So if we can find a way, and I think blockchain, by the way, is an answer for this. If you could have a micropayment system, so that IP, rather than being just owned by the company, any part of your information that was, or the tens of thousands of people's information that was put into that equation to demonstrate that that drug was safe and effective, a proportion, like a music royalty rights, a proportion would go to the drummer, a proportion would go to the songwriter, yeah? If you then had micropayments going back to people
I hear you.
For participating in drug development, take my information, use it, and sure, I can give that money to charity. I can spend it on buying myself new toys. I can pay it. I can just put it back into the NHS if I want to. You know.
As far as I'm aware, people are paid for trials anyway, aren't they?
No, you could be compensated for your expenses. You can't be paid. Doctors are paid for access to patients.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't suit me.
So the average cancer patient costs about $100,000 now.
Oh,
to get
but
one.
you say dollars, is this only in the USA or does this applicable in the UK?
It's a good question.
In the US, I would imagine
the institutions in the UK get them. Excuse me a moment. It's worth checking, but yeah. So patients cost a lot of money.
Interesting.
So lost my way. You'll have to edit this in.
That's all right. No problem at all.
I mean, you've seen me lose my way about 5 times now. It's all right.
No, it's fine. I've got a question for you. So we've heard about how companies are measured and shareholder value is measured by profitability. It seems the conventional way of determining the success or failure of a company. We also hear about triple bottom line, measuring companies through impact on planet and social impact. How's that going to affect that triple bottom line thinking? How's that going to affect the selection of leaders in the future?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And when we're building boards now, especially public boards, ESR, ESG are the key watchwords next to diversity. Those are the 2 keys you hear. And I know that some big businesses are making really big efforts, but my concern, and I'm sure yours is too, Ian, is that how much of this is greenwashing? How much of this is, again, the more complex you make the regulatory environment, the easier it is to jump through the hoops and demonstrate you've complied without actually complying.
So we should keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, 100%. It's just simple, and you can do that with, I think we already have the unit of measure, it's carbon, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we had a chat. We had a chat with David Newman, who's an expert on these things, and his view was that every company should have on their balance sheet carbon, and they should be paying either getting a credit or a debit, depending on whether they were in, their position on carbon, as their sort of total net output of carbon.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that will come in the fullness of time.
I think it has to, but again, what we're seeing as humans is we're seeing a straight line where what we've got is an exponential curve. Yeah. And quick question is, does it get? Are we going to be a short-lived species? Because the world will recover, but if we really want to, we've got to do it now.
Thing is, having one unit of measurement, that's tricky, and I would say it's quite dangerous in a way, because if we're going to look at carbon, this is where we know that plastics, microplastics do have a negative effect on reproductive systems of us, plankton, and all sorts of things. Fact, not fiction, fact. But if you look at the CO2 of plastics, this is, lots of people in the petrochemical worlds, this is their huge thing, is our CO2 is much less. It weighs less, it transports better. Plastic has less CO2, so it's better. It's not, though, is it?
No, but it's made from
There's so many
hydrocarbons.
factors. And then you look at some compostable materials, some of them, in the manufacturing of those, they'll have some extremely hazardous chemicals in them, of which I can't remember right now. So it's bloody complicated. It's really, really hard. So obviously
you can't just measure carbon, can you? You have to measure water consumption. You have to measure the amount of pollution you create, the impact on air quality, on water quality,
lots of
soil quality.
biodiversity, and also
And you will always add one. This is my point. So the more simple you can make it.
I know, but no, obviously keep it simple, stupid. It is great, but how the hell do you do it? How do you keep the environment people?
But let's pretend I'm a young entrepreneur with a great idea that's going to save the planet, and I have to comply with produce a 40-page report every time I do something, and I'm competing against Statoil for the same thing. Well, Statoil, it's done by somebody in a far corner and does the same job. I would be spending all of my time doing that. So there's got to be a balance somewhere that incentivizes the real solution, not my concern is greenwashing. That's really my point.
This kind of ties into my last question. It's not going to be the last question. I have so many questions for you, but the one I've been told to give. Profitability. This, you've hit the nail on the head here. Is it just going to be money, or is it also going to be what you can do for the environment, the ecosystem? Maybe, some companies who are terrible at paying tax may be better at paying for things to improve the environment, and all sorts of things. What do you think?
I think you have to find other ways to measure than shareholder return. The issue is that if your measurement is shareholder return, and that's dollars, which it is, then the growth is the only way to maintain that. And growth without a circular economy implies increasing, not decreasing, all of the bad things in that system. So we have to find ways to do that. And it has to start with the regulators, because they're the only ones with the power. Because it seems as consumers, we can't get our act together and actually behave in the way that we know is right.
Well, we have lots of people crying about the environment, but very few willing to pay to help the environment. Even a couple of pennies, which you can find behind the sofa, walking down the street, you can find some money to give away, can't you? But people don't seem to want to, or many. There's some extraordinary people out there, obviously.
But there's a fundamental here, isn't it? We have been brought up to consume, and companies are measured by increasing consumption, or some companies are. And therefore, the measure of success is by increasing that consumption all the time. And it's a spiral out of control.
And if we did that if that's happening with a group of cells in your body, it's called cancer, and we all know it's bad. It's just somehow we don't manage to contextualize it.
Wow, that was an interesting link.
Yeah, that's excellent. Really, really good.
Well, that's uncontrolled growth, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do you got any questions you want to ask us, Nick? We've not done this before, but you maybe want to ask us some questions.
Oh God,
I'd love to, but I've got a 3 o'clock.
Oh, you got to go, Nick. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you for your time, and
you're welcome.
Always enlightening. Fantastic.
Books. You wanted books.
Books.
Lots of Carlo Rovelli. So at the moment, Heligoland and reality is not what it seems. So physics stuff. Rereading lots of E&M Banks. Clara and the Sun. I told you to do that. Ministry for the Future is my current the book that I think you guys would enjoy reading.
It's on my list.
If you haven't read it.
Yeah.
And the two that I picked out of all of them with the biggest impact were If This Is the Man and a Truce by Primo Levi, which is the story of him at Auschwitz, and a book called The Fabric of Reality by David Deutsch, because that tells you that it is possible for humans to understand everything.
Nick, you've been fabulous. Thank you very much. See you on the other side.
Will do. Thank you, guys.
See you. Cheers, Dan.
Bye.
Bye.